Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Nimrod Pod. I am your embattled host, Lou Stump, alongside my brothers in arms, Chet Liftkit and Mel Goodman. This is the second installment of the Nimrod Bible Studies series, where we are reading the Bible from cover to cover as a community. Last time we dove deep into the book of Genesis, and today we will be exploring the book of Exodus. If you haven't started reading yet, you can jump right in. Tomorrow starts Leviticus. Jump in with us in Leviticus. Anytime you find yourself behind in the reading plan, consider each week a fresh start. Wherever you are in the reading plan, just jump in with us so we can not only read, but seek to understand God's word through communal discussion. Now, it's important that we take time to understand the first two books of the Bible. The point of Genesis and Exodus is to frame the puzzle for us. If you understand Genesis and Exodus, you will know what the picture is going to make as you watch the pieces fit together. God planted an Easter egg in Genesis 3:15. He says, as he curses the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This is the first mention of the gospel in the entire Bible. This is God declaring there's separation now, but it won't always be this way. I'm going to send a rescuer who's going to come from the seed of the woman, and he's going to restore what was lost in Eden. A day is going to come when God and man are brought back together. Then God focuses our attention in Genesis 12 on one family, Abraham's family. When you turn the page to Exodus, 400 years have passed, and Abraham's family has grown into an entire nation, the nation of Israel. This is the nation that is to produce the rescuer, the one who will crush the head of the serpent. Yet, as Exodus starts, you find this nation is actually enslaved to Egypt. They're supposed to produce a conqueror, a rescuer, but they are being conquered and enslaved. Then you get to Exodus chapter 6. It says, God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. Verse 5. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the people of Israel, whom the Egyptians hold as slaves, and I have remembered my covenant. Verse 7. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land that I swore to give Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. This is God showing up and telling the people he has plans to make a way for a holy God to be with a sinful humanity. Now, before we dive deep into Exodus, if you want a quick summary, the book is split into three main stories. First, God rescuing the nation of Israel. Second, God speaking to the nation of Israel through Moses. And third, God residing with Israel in the tabernacle. Here's what's important to keep in mind. God has plans to live with his people. He gives them commandments, and their purpose is to be a kingdom of priests. They are to reflect God's glory to the nations, so that God's glory might spread to the world through Israel. Nimrods. Any initial thoughts or reactions before we dive deep into Moses and the burning bush?
So, like you said, Lou, the people of Israel, God's kingdom, were slaves to Egypt. This happened after a new pharaoh came in charge and he turned his back on the Israelites who were fruitful and multiplied. There were more of Israelites than there were Egyptians. And the pharaoh decreed that the firstborn son of every Israelite family be killed. One of these sons was deposited by his mother into a basket in the reeds next to the Nile. Somebody went down and found him, and they raised Moses up to be a young man. One thing I want to point out here is that we looked at an evil kingdom or a sinful kingdom, at least one in the book of Genesis, which was Babylon. And this was full of arrogance and corruption. And the people that lived in Babylon, they were living against the rule of God. And we think, oh, this is the epitome of sin right here. But no, Egypt in the book of Exodus is actually worse than Babylon was. They are at odds with the word of God and the Israelites, who are God's chosen people. And after they commanded all of their firstborn sons be killed, Moses is the only one that survived. So that really frames the story. And he comes across this burning bush. I have a couple of opinions about it, but I want to hear what Lou has to say first.
So this is the story of Moses and the burning bush in a nutshell. Moses sees a bush on fire, but not burning up, not being consumed. God speaks from the bush to Moses, saying, Moses, I've seen my people suffering in Egypt, and I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring them out. And Moses pushes back hard. He asks three big questions that reveal his deepest struggles. God's call completely reshapes Moses' sense of self. And it speaks directly to three common feelings we all face as human beings: insignificance, insecurity, and inadequacy. God doesn't fix Moses by making him feel better about himself. Instead, he points Moses to who he is. Chet, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on this interaction between Moses and God himself.
Lou, there's a lot of discussion that around this burning bush. A lot of people, especially those in the psychedelic community, seem to think that Moses could have simply been under the influence of psychedelic drugs like mushrooms or acid. I personally don't think so. I think this literally happened. I think it's not too crazy to consider. I think the Lord came down and through the form of a burning bush spoke to Moses. But I did like what you say about how feelings that most people out there, especially young men in this modern world, struggle with. God, instead of validating his feelings and patting him on the back and helping him feel sorry for himself, pointed him towards his purpose. And that's one thing that we can all take a page out of this book and apply to our own lives. Pointing yourselves towards your greater purpose as a man and as a man of God will take you out of nearly any rut that you find yourself in. So that's a good takeaway.
Exactly, Chet. When it comes to overcoming insignificance, Moses says, who am I to go to Pharaoh and lead your people out? He feels like a nobody from nowhere with no status or influence. God's answer? I will be with you. And he reveals his name. I am who I am. We could do an entire lecture series on this one line alone. But the key truth is true significance isn't found in who you are, it's found in who God is. He is with us. His presence makes the ordinary significant. He is I am, eternal, all powerful, self sufficient. He is everything. He is faithful, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who keeps his promises, who renews his covenant. When God is with you, your life has infinite worth, no matter your background, your looks, or your resume. The second point is overcoming insecurity. What if they don't believe me? Moses is haunted by his past failure. He killed a man and ruined his reputation. He's convinced no one will trust him now. God gives him three signs. He turns his staff into a snake, the leper's hand, and he turns the water of the Nile into blood to show what? I have power over everything Pharaoh claims to control: life, death, and nature. The key truth here is your past doesn't disqualify you when God is the one changing you. People may remember your failures, but God can give them something worth believing in. His power at work in you. For us, the ultimate sign isn't a miracle, it's the cross. Jesus took our shame and gave us a new future. The third and final point here, as I wrap things up, overcoming inadequacy. I'm not eloquent, Exodus 4:10. Moses keeps making excuses. I'm not a good speaker. I've never been. I'm still not. God's response is, who made your mouth? I will help you speak and teach you what to say. The key truth in this third and final point is you don't have to be enough on your own. God is enough for you. He made you exactly as you are, and He chooses to use you as you are. His power works best in our weakness. Moses is a picture of a greater deliverer. Jesus is the true I am who came to rescue us from slavery to sin. To our insignificance, he left heaven to be with us. To our insecurity, he died for our past. And to our inadequacy, he gives us his spirit so we live by his strength. Nimrods, before we move on from the burning bush, I just have a couple questions for you. Which of Moses' struggles do you relate to the most?
Something that I can take from this is a lot of young men, and me included, suffer from a sort of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of people in the world that are making an impact, a lot of people that have a lot more than you, a lot of people that seem to be doing so much better. And it helps whenever you have these rules and the words of the Lord in the Bible to point you in the right direction and show you that you have a purpose that was given to you by God. You were made in his image, and what you have in store for you isn't fully shown to you yet. There's a plan for you and everyone else, and you have to trust it. And I know we're going to get into the laws later, but I feel like a lot of the rules and the commands and the commandments that God gives down to the people at the foot of the mountain are very helpful with this as well.
For me as well, Chet, it's absolute inadequacy. It is imposter syndrome. I want to feel like I am fulfilling a role here on earth that is good for both humanity and for God's intended purpose for me. At this point in my life, I'm still not sure what that's going to be. I'm not sure if I want to dive fully into creating an awesome family and bringing them up in a great Christian way, or if I have very strong desires to go out into a workforce where my voice is heard and policy is changed. And I think I want both of those things. And I'm really trying to find the way to begin that career. And that goes back into Moses. So, for a little bit more of a backstory, Moses, whenever he was sent into that river, was picked up by Pharaoh's daughter. And so he was brought into the Pharaoh's family, similar to how Joseph was back in Genesis. And he goes to this burning bush. And I can see where you're coming from, Chet, with people thinking maybe this was psychedelics. However, despite that point, Moses was still not believing. And then, as you said, Lou, God gives him the staff. It turns into a snake. His hand becomes leprous. And then finally, his hand is healed and the rivers turn red. Moses was not eloquent. He was not good with his speech. And I also don't feel like I am the best person to listen to and I'm the most eloquent with my speech as well. So I relate a lot to this story, a lot to his inadequacy. And so it gives me and a lot of other people out there faith to know that God's at the driver's seat, God's at the wheel. As long as I have faith and as long as I put my best foot forward, God is in control. And I think that is exactly why Moses believed in God and ultimately Pharaoh listening to him and letting him take the people of Israel out of Egypt for a better future. Lou?
I'm actually going to throw a question right back at you, Mel. As someone searching for purpose, and I am right there with you, we are in the exact same situation. How does knowing I am is with you change the way you see your worth or abilities? And how does that make you rethink what your true purpose is and what you can achieve in this life?
It's actually very calming once you understand faith and that the entire purpose of this world is ultimately to go to heaven and bring as many people as you can with you. So, with that being said, we have time on earth to have an impact. and that impact is not written in stone. However, having faith in God allows me to believe that I have a path or multiple paths, and through faith and through effort and search, constant reevaluation in my search to do what some would consider is good for this world and for the afterlife. I think that there's not just one thing that I could do or should do, but there's many things that I want to actively pursue to ultimately fulfill my purpose for what is the afterlife.
Beautiful. For me, I think you need to take time to sit and listen to God. Moses felt inadequate, but the reality is, I am is with you. And if you take time to sit and listen to him, be available to him, he can speak to you and he can tell you what his plan is for you. And outside of sitting with God, you can simply pray for wisdom as long as you trust his plan. You know he has a predetermined plan for you and you fully trust it. You fully surrender to it. You fully surrender to Christ and you ask for that wisdom so that you can progress along the trajectory that he pre-planned for you. You can get a kickstart on God's plan and you can utilize your free will to attack it in a faithful way and be as Christ-like as possible and be radical and live unashamedly and burn the boats and leave a legacy. That's what life is all about. So after chapters 1-4, when Pharaoh tries to destroy Israel, chapters 5-15 are a confrontation between God and Pharaoh. We first have these 5 plagues where Pharaoh either hardened his heart or his heart grew hard. But then in the second set of 5 plagues, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Nimrods, what's going on here?
I think it's that God is giving Pharaoh a chance to believe and to stop rejecting the message that the Israelites should be freed from their slavery. So the first 5 plagues, the Pharaoh's heart is hardened on its own. He does it himself. And by hardened his heart, if anybody out there needs to know, it means that he doesn't believe it's an otherworldly divine presence that's causing these plagues. Some of this has to do with the fact that his sorcerers and magicians can make the same thing happen with their secret magic. But the next set of plagues, even if the Pharaoh was set to start believing and rationalize with Moses and release the Israelites from slavery, God hardens his heart anyway to fully prove to both the Israelites and the Egyptians that he is the one true Lord, our God, and they need to believe in his all-encompassing power. So it's a process where God is proving through Moses that he is the true Lord and that he is all powerful and that the Israelites are his chosen people and they should be released.
Yeah, Chet. So exactly. The first 5 plagues, Pharaoh was hardening his heart by himself. And it was God's plan all along to essentially harden Pharaoh's heart for the last 5 plagues. And my understanding of this is that God already believed Pharaoh's heart was not going to heaven. He already believed he was too far gone, too evil. That is why Israel needed to leave. I don't think God showed any sort of remorse towards Pharaoh. And I think that's exactly why he would not even give Pharaoh the option to let the Israelites go. I'm not saying that if God didn't harden Pharaoh's heart, maybe he still wouldn't do it himself. And I'm not sure we can even see that here in the Bible. However, there were opportunities where Pharaoh told Moses he would let the people go. And then the next day, he went back on his word. Lou, I'd be curious to see what you have to say about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart done by God alone, and if you think Pharaoh was doomed by God from the beginning.
The whole point of this confrontation between God and the Pharaoh is that God knew Pharaoh would resist. He knew he was a sinner. He knew he embodied the evil of humanity. But he still gave him chances. The first 5 plagues, Pharaoh hardens his own heart. The stakes weren't that high. But after 5 times where God gives Pharaoh a chance. God then hardens Pharaoh's heart. So all of Pharaoh's advisors, his cabinet members, his constituents see Pharaoh and his stubbornness through the first 5 plagues. But when they really start feeling the weight of the latter 5 plagues, even his closest advisors think he's lost his mind. And it is at this point that God bends Pharaoh's evil to his own purposes and lures him into his own destruction in front of his own people. That's what I think this whole confrontation is about.
I especially like when we get to the end of these plagues and we get to the 10th one, and this is when we get to the Passover situation. So for hundreds of years, the Pharaoh has been killing the firstborn son of all the Israelite families in Egypt. And this final plague is symbolic of the consequences of that onto the Egyptian people. He says, "If you believe in me, then you will paint above your door with the blood of a lamb, and I will go through Egypt at midnight, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, except for the ones in the homes with blood of lamb painted above the door." So anybody who believed in what the Lord said and was true to his word and was fearful of God, they painted their doors and their firstborn survived. And when all of the Egyptians who were prideful and sinful and arrogant, including the Pharaoh, when the Pharaoh's firstborn son died, they all were forced to reckon with the reality that this is the one true God, and they have to let these people go. And so this is a celebration where they're celebrating the Israelite slaves being freed from Egypt. And we do it to this day. So any Nimrods out there that don't know the history, there it is. You can find it in chapter 12 of Exodus.
So in this Passover, the house is covered with the blood of the Passover lamb were passed over by the angel of death, and their sons were spared. The whole point of this is that God cannot overlook sin. We're supposed to fear God for a reason. The Passover was God declaring that he is a holy God and he cannot overlook sin. The angel of death clearly did not play favorites. The angel of death was there to execute judgment on the entire land. Yet God gave the Israelites a way to survive because a death took place for their sins via the Passover lamb. And there were also similar consequences for the golden calf, but we'll get there in a minute. In this Passover, Pharaoh loses his own son and is finally compelled to let the Israelites leave. Soon after they leave, he changes his mind and he chases after the Israelites. And this is when God gives Moses the power to part the Red Sea. And the Egyptian army behind him is consumed by the water.
I want to talk about the Red Sea. One of my initial thoughts was, we've seen some of the acts of God, the violence, the killing, whenever we talked about Sodom and Gomorrah. And I think what people might get taken off track here when reading this book is, if God is so good and benevolent, then why does he kill all the Egyptians? And to that I say, he didn't. He didn't kill all the Egyptians. The Pharaoh said he would release them. They went on their way. He chased them with his army. And when they crossed the Red Sea in an obvious miracle, showing God's willingness to let them get away from the Egyptians, they continued their pursuit. And so they found themselves basically killing themselves by going out into the middle of the Red Sea and being swallowed by the waves. So I blame the Egyptians. And I think this is a story of the arrogance of these Egyptians coming back to bite them. So we've seen stories like this throughout the first couple of books of the Bible, and this is just another example. One thing that I wanted to stress was the Pharaoh went back on his word multiple times. And so that's one thing we say a lot in the modern world. Be a man of your word. Do what you say you're going to do and say what you do truthfully. That is in our holy book. It's truly one of the main tenets of how people need to act in civilization. So people need to really take it to heart, to be a man of their word, don't go back on things they say, and don't lie.
Great call out, Chet. In the Song of the Sea, we learn that the Lord reigns as king. They proclaim that he confronts evil, he redeems the slaves, he leads his people to the promised land, and he dwells among his people. But as soon as they get to the other side of the body of water, they start complaining that they're thirsty and they're hungry. This goes to show that God isn't going to restore what was lost in Eden just yet. The separation between God and man persists. Mel, can you take us through chapters 16 through 18 in the wilderness?
Absolutely. So something very important before we go right into chapter 16 is chapter 15, verse 3 of Exodus. It says, Jehovah is a man of war. Jehovah is his name. As we all know, God is good and only good. However, he decides to create humanity with their own free will, similar to himself. And we've got these people like Pharaoh, and we've got these people like the family of Abraham. Two different families, two different people, good and evil. So after the Red Sea is parted, they go into the wilderness of Shur. They're without food and water for days, and the people are crying out to Moses and crying out to God to help them. So ultimately, God shows Moses a tree, and Moses puts this tree in the undrinkable rivers so they can all have water. That is the second time that God goes out of his way to provide for the people of Israel. And then we get into chapter 16, and people begin to lose their faith again as they go into the wilderness of sin. And the people are still jibber jabbering and talking behind God's back, not trusting the plan and not trusting Moses. And so ultimately, Moses cries out to God again, and God provides food and flesh for the nighttime and bread for the morning. The only rule was you cannot eat on the Sabbath. You got to keep holy the Sabbath as God kept holy the Sabbath in Genesis. So God provides double the food and drink for the Sabbath, so nobody has to work on the Sabbath. And there were a handful of people who ate their double portion on Saturday, hoping there would be some on Sunday because they had no faith. Little did they know there was no food, and God was not happy with them. So as they're leaving the wilderness of sin, the people were once again thirsty, and they spoke out against God behind his back. At this point, God, after providing for them 3 times now, is very upset with the people. These people are not true followers of God as the people of Israel should be. If I saw one miracle when God parts the Red Sea and kills all those who have bad will against me, I would immediately believe in God. I would immediately follow his will. And then 2 more times does he provide for them, and they still don't trust. With that being said, do you all believe these people still deserve saving when they have no faith in God, who has now provided for them on 3 different occasions?
I think the people deserve saving. I think it's expected whenever we talk about the nature of humans and where we were in the Garden of Eden and what dark paths these humans have gone down since then. I think with free will, there comes the expectation of some people to become non-trusting and arrogant and trusting in themselves more than God. And every time we see this pattern, they're humiliated. So I think it's just a lesson. Like it's a cycle of you get too prideful, one of the 7 deadly sins, or you don't trust fully, and then eventually it comes back to bite you. You get humiliated. So I think that the people are still worth saving.
I would have to agree. I'm not sure if they're worth saving, but I can tell you this: humanity is thoroughly sinful. A holy God cannot overlook said sin, and God ultimately rescues his people to be with his people. Why did he rescue the nation of Israel? It's really simple. He wanted to be with them despite this separation between God and man. The book of Exodus is merely setting the stage for the rest of the Bible because it cultivates the need for an even greater rescue, an even greater exodus. The second half of Exodus is the covenant at Mount Sinai. In chapters 19 through 24, God renews his covenant with the nation of Israel. We trace the redemptive plan of God through Abraham from one family to one nation. And in chapters 20 through 23, we get the terms of God's covenant with Israel, the 10 Commandments, and then 52 more commands about worship and social justice. Chet, what do we need to know about these terms?
I think what the people at the time, and even in this world we live in today, need to know is that these are non-negotiable terms. The first 10 seem pretty straightforward, right? They seem like it's just common sense. But why is it common sense? Because they were given to these people, they were written in the Bible, and they were kept by people over the last 2,000 years. So, of course, they developed into common sense. It's the very foundation for what we live in today, the foundation for civilization. So, it's like a number of almost invisible pillars that hold up the civilization that we live in today. People think that it's not necessary to keep these. People think as the world changes, things are acceptable that weren't before, but they're not. They're not. These commandments are what formed all of Western civilization, and they're what keeps it together every day. So people need to respect them. They need to read them first. They need to respect them, and they need to commit themselves to keeping them in the name of the Lord.
And Egypt was the epicenter of the entire world. There weren't 7 different continents with a bunch of people on it. There was Egypt and the rules that Pharaoh put in place. As we all know, Pharaoh was an evil person. And with that being said, the laws of Egypt were very much unlike and far worse than these 10 commandments. So once God gives these 10 commandments on Mount Sinai, that essentially becomes the playbook for Christian nations down the road. Any good law that we have in place here at the United States comes directly back to these 10 commandments. And without God interceding and giving these rules to his people, life on earth would be a lot different.
I completely agree. Then God tells Moses to make a sanctuary for him so he can dwell among his people. This is a covenant moving from a family to the nation of Israel. And in chapters 25 to 31, we get the blueprint for the tabernacle. And there's a lot of symbolism from the Garden of Eden. And this tabernacle concept is basically a portable Eden where humanity can be with God. And then in chapters 32 through 34, Israel breaks the covenant. We get the golden calf. God gives the people of Israel the law. And even though they could consistently see God's presence on the mountain right in front of them, a few weeks go by without Moses, and the Hebrews have Aaron make a new God for them to worship, the golden calf. This just shows that humanity is incapable of satisfying God's law and obeying him how he deserves to be obeyed. Instead of influencing the nations, Israel is being influenced by the nations. This is sin. Sin is cheating God out of what is rightfully his. And as I said before, a holy God cannot overlook sin. And God sets out to destroy the people of Israel. But Abraham begs God not to destroy his own people. And thankfully, God upholds his covenant and relents. And he promises to renew his covenant. Exodus 34, 6 to 7. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. God promises to renew his covenant. He renews the covenant with the family and creates a new one with the nation of Israel. What did you guys notice in chapters 32 through 34 as Israel breaks the covenant?
I think pointing out the preface to Israel breaking the covenant is important for me. After it was lost in the Garden of Eden, when they ate of the apple, God's presence was finally restored to the Israelites through the Ark of the Covenant. This is a place where they can be in the presence of God for the first time since the Garden of Eden. So this is the promise that was made to Abraham down through generations. They finally get to enjoy it. But I think, just given the theme of this story with these people repeatedly breaking the rules and always being impatient and arrogant and thinking that they know best and they can outsmart God with the golden calf and breaking the covenant, it's just like, when do they get off? I feel like most people think that they could adhere to these rules more than the Israelites in the Bible. But I implore all you Nimrods out there to examine your own lives. Even if these aren't actions, examine your own thoughts and find that you are susceptible to sin and breaking the rules that God laid out for you in your own life. So it's really a story of the human condition where they fall into sin and out of the favor of the Lord, and then they gradually grow back into it. And it's a never-ending process. So I like this story.
The most jaw-dropping fact from these chapters for me is Aaron. So Aaron is the well-spoken brother of Moses. He is Moses's right-hand man throughout all of this. And ultimately, he is the one who decides to create this false god. And it goes to show that all these people have to trust in God through one person, whether that is Abraham, whether that is Joseph, whether that is now Moses. And it's not until Jesus comes to earth as a human being that 11 of his disciples can ultimately take the faith for the rest of time to both preserve Christianity and spread it. It's hard for me living in a time where Jesus has been, because I feel like I'm having so much judgment towards these people and how selfish they are being not to trust in the Lord. But I have to have pity on them and come from a spot of understanding, because life was much different back then. They didn't have the blueprint of all of the miracles that Jesus did and the faith that he created. So it's very jaw-dropping to me that the people of Israel, the chosen people, broke this covenant after God continued to provide for them. However, we continue to sin day after day here, even after Jesus came down.
Well said, Mel. In chapters 35 through 40, Moses then builds the tabernacle, but once erected, Moses cannot enter the tent. This is because Israel's sin has damaged humanity's relationship with God so much, and we're left with an open-ended question: how is God going to reconcile this conflict? Well, I'll tell you one thing. We are clear from Exodus that God is not going to restore what was lost in Eden yet. Why? Because separation still exists. There's separation between God and Moses at the burning bush. Moses can't come completely near the bush. When God descends upon Mount Sinai, only Moses could go up to speak with God, and God speaks to the people of Israel through a mediator. There's clearly separation. When they erect the tabernacle and God's presence fills the Holy of Holies, there's a curtain that separates God from the people. Only one person, one time of year, could enter the Holy of Holies. Why? Because there's separation. We've established that there's separation. How do you guys think God is going to reconcile this conflict before I answer?
I think he's going to require them to sacrifice in their own lives to finally heed the rules that he laid out and give things away from their own lives that are meaningless and material in order to grow closer to God in his plan. I think he's gonna make them be selfless and humble, and only then will they be able to grow closer.
To consolidate the learnings from Exodus, God has rescued his people to be with his people, and yet he is holy and cannot overlook sin, and humanity is still thoroughly sinful, including his very own people. Therefore, separation between God and man still persists. Therefore, and here's your answer to how God is going to reconcile this conflict, humanity is in need of a greater rescue, a greater exodus. When you turn to the New Testament, Jesus is that rescuer. Jesus has come to lead a greater exodus. Even more than the nation of Israel being enslaved to Egypt, all of humanity is enslaved to sin and in need of liberation. Even more than the nation of Israel being at a dead end at the Red Sea, we find ourselves at a dead end in ourself. We in our own strength cannot forge our way back into a right relationship with God. The Israelites learned this the hard way. Jesus comes and says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to the Father but through who? Me. Not through Abraham's bloodline, through Jesus. Jesus parts the Red Sea between us and God. Jesus is our rescuer. He liberates us from slavery to sin through his death, burial, and resurrection. And ultimately, Jesus is our greater high priest. High priest's responsibility was to go into the Holy of Holies once a year to make atonement to the sins of the people. He would do that by slaughtering a lamb. It was the blood of the lamb that would atone for the nation of Israel. John the Baptist said, Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Jesus was our greater high priest who has gone before God. It was his body that was broken, and it was his blood that was shed once and for all, making a way when there was no way for sinful, unholy people to once again be right with the holy God. Because Christ entered into the Holy of Holies on our behalf, the curtain that separates the Holy of Holies from humanity is torn from top to bottom. Now, all those who put their trust in Christ now belong with God in the Holy of Holies. Anyone who would trust in Christ has access. The gap is closed. Christ has bridged the gap. Jesus has made a way for us to live with God in the Holy of Holies. Christ has made a way for us all to come up the mountain to meet with God. When you put your faith in Jesus, God puts his spirit inside of you and tabernacles with you. And I hope to leave you guys with this question. Do you have any value for the presence of God in your life? Now that we've covered the entire book, what are the key takeaways? What do we need to know as we journey through the latter books of the Old Testament?
I have a bit of a key takeaway that kind of ties into the world today. And I just wanted to dive back into the commands that Moses brought down to the people. They talk about impartial justice. They talk about no false reports, no favoring the poor or the rich, no bribes, fair trials, no corruption, and equality under the law. And when I asked Rock about this, it said this is a good weapon against populism. And so I dug into that a little bit. Whenever Grok says populism, it basically means mob rule. And so that's different from what we have going on right now. We're capturing the will of the people. And I think what Grok means when it takes God's words in the Bible and puts them into an argument like this is that it's trying to prevent the mob rule and acting as a check on leaders who are snakes, preventing perverted justice and upholding the rule of law over the voice of the people. And I thought all these Nimrods out there might hear this or read this somewhere and say, well, I better not be a populist then. But worry not, worry not, because God also commands that people don't spread false reports, pervert justice, or take bribes. God also commands that people don't follow the crowd in wrongdoing. So when you consider the people that we're up against today in our spiritual war between good and evil, what are they guilty of? And what are you guilty of? We're just the will of the people trying to survive. We're trying to live true to God's word and true to ourselves and our principles. And the corrupt elite in today's world are just that. They're corrupt. the biblical words on this. Proverbs chapter 17:23. The wicked accept bribes in secret to pervert the course of justice. Everybody does that today. Everybody's doing that. Psalm 58 laments corrupt leaders who speak lies and devise injustice. That's what we're fighting against right now. So I think as we're trying to apply the Bible to how we live today and what we want as a vision for our future, this is important. We are in the fight against evil, and all you Nimrods out there can be armed with this book and those words, those verses in your spiritual journey as well. So just some food for thought for those Nimrods out there.
Globalism, technocracy, authoritarianism is not the will of God. Populism is the will of the people. It is mob rule. The will of the people is the will of Israel, meaning followers of Christ, the Big C church. We are mere images of God. We are reflections of a holy God on earth. The will of the people, populism, should be the will of God, because the will of the managerial class, the will of the tyrant, is the opposite of the will of God. Think back to Pharaoh in the book of Exodus. Pharaoh's kingdom epitomizes humanity's rebellion against God. Populism is the answer. Populism is Christianity at the end of the day. Mel?
I want to apologize to all you Nimrods listening out there, as we got to remember in the Old Testament, all they are living for at this point is survival. They don't have a moral code until Exodus. And as we will see in Leviticus, they don't even have a way to atone for their sins or ask God for forgiveness, because they don't understand who God is as a person, because they have yet to see him like we have in Jesus coming down to the earth. So whenever you are also looking at the Old Testament and you're thinking about all the decisions they made, their lack of faith in God, remember, they had a different perspective. We are always, unfortunately, continuing to sin in our own lives, which is no different than the lack of faith they had in the Old Testament. So I ask you to do a deep dive on yourself and continue to improve yourself each day so you can walk in the will of God. And hopefully, you all are following along to read the Bible with us in its entirety.
I actually want to revisit that open-ended question I posed earlier. Do you have any value for the presence of God in your life? Like, if we got to meet God face to face, would it be easier for you to follow God? I'd say absolutely not. The point of the book of Hebrews is that we have it so much better than they had it in the Old Testament. Like, thank goodness God says we all can come up to the top of the mountain. The veil was torn from top to bottom because you belong in here with me. God made us the tabernacle. Christ moved heaven and earth for you to be able to be with God, meet with God, enjoy his presence, come into his courts with thanksgiving. We should be a people who are committed to enjoying our God who is present. And as we move into this Christmas season and into the new year, I really hope all you Nimrods out there take time to enjoy our God who is present. Take time away from work. Enjoy our God. Be with God. Sit with God. Listen for God. Pray to God. Ask for wisdom. Ask for guidance. Ask for strength and grace. If you make yourself available to him, I am will be with you. Any closing thoughts from you, Chet?
All you Nimrods out there, if you haven't joined us yet, this is going to be the journey of a lifetime. We need you guys in on this action. I know our number of viewers is going up, our number of listeners is going up. This is a perfect time to get involved. We're going to be running this thing cover to cover. So get in now, get caught up with these couple of episodes on what you missed, and just join in, because this is transformative for me already, just reading these first two books. So hop on the boat, hop on the steamliner. We're going around the world.
Since we embarked on this journey and surrendered ourselves fully to him and devoted our time to reading and understanding his word, getting to know our God intimately, Our viewership has gone up. We've made connections with people who will give us a larger audience. There's a lot of new Nimrods listening right now. And all I ask of you is that you jump in with us. Maybe you weren't here for Genesis. Maybe you weren't here for Exodus. Leviticus starts now. Consider yourself caught up. If there's one thing the globalists hate the most, it is populism, the will of the people, which is the will of Israel, which is ultimately the will of God. We are reflections, mere images of a holy God on Satan's earth. We are in the midst of a spiritual battle. Rise up, be radical, get to know your God, listen to your God, proclaim the great word of your God to all you know. We say it all the time. The answer to 1984 is 1776. But even more importantly, the answer to 666 is Christ the King. God bless America. Surrender to Jesus. Jesus is Lord. Christ is King. Merry Christmas to all. We're so glad you're on this journey with us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.